90 subscribers. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for subscribing. And each one of these 90 people is a soul that believes in me, and I'm very honored and humbled, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you eternally, and inshallah may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us grow this page as well, and widen our support system for each other. That's one thing. Another thing is, my last video, I told you guys that it's not going to make sense of why I spoke of it until this video, which is, I guess, technically part 3 of the name series, if you will. Even though the second video that I made, it's not exactly clear as to why it's part 2, but I will explain that here. When I talked about the fire, and when I talked about how Ibrahim, my son, was just so secure, and he was bundled and in the midst of the chaos. And it's not just that he was warm and he was cozy and how I was dressed and everything was completely unorchestrated, but it was he wasn't even feeling the agony that I was feeling. He was smiling. He was such a cheerful baby in the midst of this whole calamity, I guess. And he really was like the ease in the situation, and he was the nur in the situation, subhanallah. And just his so we know about the story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salatu wassalam, where he was so confident that idol worshipping was invalid. And so what he did was he knocked down all the statues, and he told his father at the time, look at the biggest statue, and if it can defend itself, then you know what, I'm wrong, and you were right to worship these statues. And he had such courage. But he had such reassurance. And he had such sakina in his heart to be able to make that distinction and to be able to make such a bold move. And so that's one thing about Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam that I hope Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow my son Ibrahim to have, is that I don't want him to be complacent in this world. I want him to be able to think logically with his mind and be like, but that doesn't make sense. But I don't care if all of you do that. To me, it just doesn't work. There's something that just doesn't fit and doesn't mesh. And I really hope that my son is able to follow in those tracks. And yeah, the example of the, like, I just feel like, I don't know, is it silly to say that, like, the story of Ibrahim and how he was thrown into the fire and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cooled him, and subhanallah, like, my son Ibrahim, in the midst of this fire, he was just the cooling for me and him, and I feel like his nude was what saved us. And I don't know, there is a parallel between both stories, whether you think it's silly or not. And that's that. And also, I wanted to share that story. I really did. I hope you guys aren't sitting there thinking, why didn't she call her husband? Why didn't she call her husband? And I have to tell you that that's probably the biggest thing for my husband, is he's just like, why didn't you call me? Why didn't you call me? You're supposed to call me. That was like a big thing. But for me at the time, I was like, I didn't call him because, first of all, he was 10 minutes away, and 10 minutes is a long time for this kind of situation. My neighbor was steps away. And my neighbor, when she called the maintenance, she didn't call the maintenance like company through the apartment complex. Who she called was the direct maintenance guy, because she has a connection with him because she's lived there for so long. So he feeds her cats when she goes on vacation and stuff like that. So I was able to get more. I just thought that it just made more sense. And considering that she knew more about the fireplace situation, I just thought it was just smarter to call her. Well, actually, my husband's like, I would have told you I closed the vents. And the thing is about that situation is that, you think the hardest part is the life and death situation where you scenario, I keep saying situation, where you have to like run out of whatever and all that stuff, but that's actually not the hardest part. The hardest part is living with yourself after, living with the guilt of putting yourself and your child in harm's way. And as much as I felt guilty, my husband felt 1,000 times guiltier because he kept saying, I closed the vent. I closed it. I closed it because it was cold at night, because I told you guys about the whole situation. And when you have the vent open, it kind of allows for cold air. And so he's like, I closed it. I should have warned you. I should have told you that I closed the lid. And I'm like, no, it's completely on me. It was so reckless for me to turn on a fireplace without making sure that it was open. I mean, it's not your fault. I shouldn't have assumed it. And we both carried this guilt with us, of course. And I have to, like, I couldn't even, I felt more than I felt guilty. I told you I felt the responsibility. And in one of the captions that I put in my last video about, I actually thought about this, and you actually realize that motherhood is such a responsibility right the moment the baby is born, because Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, I didn't have any complications, but so much as not being able to nurse your child, for me, was so difficult. I wasn't able to nurse my son Ibrahim. And I felt this guilt, this tremendous toll of guilt. And I was just like, why wasn't I able to nurse him? I should be able to provide the best for my child. And I couldn't, and I failed him at this. It starts just by these, like, what you might think is mundane. And in the grand scheme of things, it is mundane, because I have had one child nursed and the other child bottle fed, and alhamdulillah, they're both healthy, they're both wonderful, they're both just amazing, and they both got the best, the most that I want my son Ibrahim to inherit. But another thing was the sakina in his heart, and I hope that my son always has sakina. Like I said, his resilience, his ability to be able to think for himself and be a leader for himself. And even the tawakkul, when he was going into the fire, you imagine, I don't think you can, imagine knowing that you're going into a burning pit of fire and you're still you just have the sakina in your heart, because you know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take care of you for doing the right thing. And he had tawakkul to the last moment. He didn't know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was going to cool the fire. He didn't, but he was still willing to take that burn for making a stand and doing the right thing. So I'm really